Liar. Everywhere. On netrootsradio.com. David Waldman. Kagro. In the morning. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, oh my goodness, wow. Help, I'm drowning. Hey, good morning, everybody. How are you drowning? How are you doing? Okay, well, Friday, April 19th, 2024. Time for another show, but I guess the rest of me doesn't know it yet. Okay, I think everything's okay. Rushing to the microphone today, just a little bit behind the times, and everything's working anyway. Experimenting with a new setup in the soundboard today, which allows me to loop things endlessly if you want, and also to I found the button again. I had found it at some point, I think by accident, that allows you to play sound effects up on top of another, so that if this intro music is rolling and somebody says we need to be enthusiastic today, and you want to play the enthusiasms button or acting or something like that, you can still do that and still have your music bed. I knew there was a way to do this, and I had found it at one point accidentally, and then I forgot where the button was. And the other day I said to myself, I need dramatic music and also to be able to say in the middle of both. It's an important function. Anyway, oh yes, right, I ought to turn on my alarm. I'm very disorganized today. It just occurs to me now, I wonder if I'll be able to rig it up, but I have a Rosalind McGregor contribution waiting, and I have done nothing to prep for bringing it to the air. And so, well, I don't know. Let me see if I can preview it and get it queued up maybe during one of the breaks, or else promise it to you sometime very soon, except, of course, it's Friday, which means the first opportunity is Monday. All right, well, look, at least I'm not on trial criminally in New York, like that other orange guy that everybody hates so much. They've got a jury, it turns out, 12 jurors selected, but of course they're aiming to have an extra half a jury around as alternates because, of course, Donald Trump is anticipated to attempt to intimidate/murder some of these other jurors, and they need to have extras around. And as you know, he feels free to do that in the middle of Fifth Avenue, and he feels probably that he could shoot you in the middle of Fifth Avenue and not lose any votes on the jury. So I guess he'll put his theory to the test. He's already intimidated one or two jurors who had been selected, had made it through the selection process, out of serving. I don't know if both of them gave the same reasoning, but it was an interesting approach that at least one of them, I guess the first one I heard of yesterday, apparently made it through all the questioning, was acceptable to both sides, was impaneled on the jury, and then the next day came back and said, "Hey, Judge, I've got a little something to tell you. I don't think I can be impartial. I told you yesterday I thought I could be impartial, but today I'm telling you I've slept on it and I think I can't be impartial." What do you mean, juror? That's actually a fairly serious thing for you to bring up. Why? What makes you think you can no longer be impartial? And the answer, really, after some questioning, turned out to be, I don't think I want to be impartial because I don't think I want to be on the jury because after the New York Times, well, it's not just the New York Times. I shouldn't blame it on them, but all of the media that were watching the trial, that, I don't know, it's like there's no collective memory whatsoever and no common sense whatsoever. But they figure we're watching the trial. It's a public event. Everything's on the record, and they're doing jury voir dire, and they are eliciting responses from these jurors about this, to some extent, about their personal lives. They want to get some sense of anything that might reveal bias. What do you do for a living? How old are you? The reporters, of course, can observe these people and make physical observations about them, and then whatever comes out in the questioning. I work in a bookshop. I've worked for 29 years in a hospital. Blah, blah, blah. The newspaper reporters felt compelled to produce that because, of course, they've been sent there by the newspapers and are being paid to produce content from the trial, and the trial part of the trial hasn't started yet. So this is all they've got. So they're putting out live updates, via Twitter or via the paper on their website occasionally, a rolling update of anything that gets dispatched from the courthouse. And they're giving out detailed descriptions of who the jurors are. And to no one's surprise, people are identifying these jurors very readily. As we said yesterday, they're putting out information. This is a person who's worked for 23 years at a bookshop in Midtown Manhattan and has, an independent shop somewhere near the blah, blah, blah district. And they're 56 years old and bald. And, people know exactly who they're talking about. And so this one juror says, I can no longer be impartial. But what they really meant was all my friends and family started texting me, are you the juror? Because it sounds exactly like you, which means it's pretty damn easy to identify who the jurors are. And by the way, I guess this seems like it's new because we haven't really been discussing it. But they went through this for the juries in other trials as well. And the jury, I think, impaneled in Judge Engeron's case. Now he's the one. Wasn't there was one where they waived a jury trial. I can't remember exactly which one it was, but one of the previous trials, they kept the lid on this thing and they kept the jury anonymous, essentially, not only to the press but to the judge. The judge didn't have their identifying information. So I don't know. That seems like probably a better practice. Anyway, yesterday the judge kind of cracked down on things and said, all right, well, let's not have any personal identifying information like this reported by the papers. And we'll put a lid on these things. And of course, also let's have some discretion here in what we decide to report. And of course, the newspaper guys are pushing back because that's all there is to report. So they're upset about it. But there's at least one, and I think they've now dismissed two jurors who had been previously impaneled, have replaced them. But this is why they got it. Well, it's a standard practice to carry alternates. I don't know whether it's standard practice to carry 6 alternates, but in this case, they are going to do it. I don't know. I've been in some jurisdictions, I've seen 2 alternates, but 6 might not be out of the ordinary for a lengthy trial of any kind. But they may need 700 if you're going to intimidate them off of the jury this way. I don't think anybody received any threats just yet, but I think that was clearly the implication. If people in the neighborhood can guess it's me, one of them could be a malicious actor at some point and guess that it's me as well, and I don't really want to deal with that. So here we go. We're off on a wild ride for that one. Let's see. I got a note this morning from Greg, who has the morning off, but yet sent this along. I want to see what's going on here. Oh, okay. Something from Twitter, from the Process Party. There's another, process nut running around. It's the golden age of process discussion on Twitter, and it's too bad. The place is a cesspool, and I'm not part of it, so that's kind of sad. But the Process Party, I see occasionally, has popped up in discussions with the process people, represented in the Process Party are the process people. What are they having to say here? This sort of thing never happens, says a member. And then procedural pedants say, ho ho, how quickly we forget about Speaker Frumpington's deft procedural maneuvers in passing the Tariff Act of 1847. Sometimes it feels a little bit like that. But other times, not so much, in terms of how much time has to pass. As I've mentioned many times before, many members of the Senate, not many, but a handful of members of the Senate who were present during the lead up to the nuclear option and the discussion of changing filibuster rules by simple majority insisted that this has never been done before, when in fact not only had it been done, but they had participated in doing it. And then, of course, all of America is by now, between the Trump second impeachment and the Mayorkas impeachment. Well, not all of America, because most people didn't know anything about the Mayorkas impeachment, but they're actually having late night comedians, well, one of them anyway, Stephen Colbert, mentioning the impeachment, the prior impeachment of Secretary of War William Belknap, although I did notice that he says Belknap, which maybe it is. I was sort of going with the KN Knight pronunciation, Belknap. Could be Belknap. I don't know. He's dead. I haven't asked him. And At any rate, you're not allowed to ask a cabinet member their pronunciation after they've died, though you can impeach them. And I guess you can impeach them after they're dead as well. So, all right, let's see. That seems on point for today. There's lots still happening, and of course, Congress may be working into the weekend to take care of its obligations before they take off for the week. That is to say, next week's recess. And they have plenty to do. Aid to everyone, including Taiwan. And of course, the game has shifted once again over in the Middle East. I will simply, I guess, note for the record that Israel has, I don't know how you even describe it, but Israel has struck out at Iran. You could say struck back at Iran, but then they would say, well, struck back for what? And then you'd have to, well, then Iran launched this, but they only did that because Israel did that. Yeah. So the usual with Israel, you end up losing track of exactly what went on. But apparently, well, let's see. We could look at the live updates that they have over at the New York Times, although sometimes I wish they would just give me an article here. But yeah, the strike, as they put it, appears to be Israel's first military response to Iran's attack, which was, of course, Iran's military response to the other attack. All right. So first it was, I guess first in this chain of events, well, first there was the Babylonian exile. And then, anyway, I guess this chain of events starts with the Israeli strike against the Iranian, well, what Iran claimed was a diplomatic building and an attachment to their consulate, and what Israel claimed was just a spy factory, essentially. And, I don't know whose word do you want to take as between Iran and Israel when it comes to clandestine activity in Syria. But okay, there it was. There was a strike against what Iran claimed as a diplomatic outpost in Damascus, and then the response, the very large number of drones and I don't know if it's drones and cruise missiles or not, I don't know, but at any rate, drones was the bulk of this thing, although the drones look a little bit like cruise missiles. Slower moving, though, and most of them, 99% of them, knocked down. By the way, just hearkening back to Star Wars days, not the movie, for the portion of our audience that, well, one would have been too young to have been around during the original release of the Star Wars movies. That's amazing enough. But two would be too young to know that there was a period in American history during the Reagan administration and shortly thereafter, during which Star Wars was the jokey moniker hung on a space-based missile defense system that had been proposed. Named, of course, after the movie. I have to explain this to you. There's people who are working age and voting age out there that don't remember this, I guess, because it faded away until it was brought back recently by Marjorie Taylor Greene in the form of Jewish space lasers. So everything's going to have to be Jewish today in order to make it onto the show. But yeah, it was essentially that. We're going to have space-based lasers that could take out. Could take out intercontinental ballistic missile warheads and launch vehicles, I suppose. Back in the days when most missiles it was planned that we were going to be lobbing them all the way across to the other side of the earth, as the United States, primarily the United States and Soviet Union, lobbed nuclear weapons back at one another. And these launch vehicles would go up into orbital space. And so it made sense to base your space lasers out there, not just because they were Jewish and were settling the outer territories of the atmosphere, but because that's where the warheads were going. And you could intercept them there. And it's also, I guess if you're going to be blowing up hundreds of nuclear warheads before they impact, that's when you want to get. Well, that's when you want to take care of them. Why not do it in outer space? Much better for you if you can take care of it out there. It never came to fruition, but it was slated to be budgeted at billions and billions of dollars, perhaps even $1 trillion or more dollars, astronomical sums. How do you, in the 1980s, design something like this without spending billions of dollars on it? And then people pointed out, even at 99% effectiveness, if you can even get there, the number of warheads you're lobbing at one another, it's hardly worth it. You'll spend billions and billions of dollars only to say, well, we can reduce a nuclear exchange to one that kills 90% of the population of the Earth rather than 94% of the population of the Earth immediately. So maybe not worth it. Anyway, similar prospect here with the missile defense systems. And so Iran basically has to say, in order to make any sort of statement at all, it'll launch like 300 drones, and nearly all of them knocked down. Anyway, this was supposed to be, well, there was a brief moment where everybody thought this might be the end of it. The Iranians said, yeah, we have no particular interest in escalating, even though we didn't really succeed in hitting any of our targets. They sort of tried to hint they weren't particularly interested in actually doing that. They just wanted to make some kind of response. And I couldn't tell, no one could, whether this was the Iranians just being somewhat generous. I guess if you can refer to launching 300 explosive drones at you as being generous, but they didn't demand blood in exchange for this Damascus attack, which was kind of surprising. And again, a brief moment in which the United States also leaned on Israel to say, let's not escalate things. Let's take this gift here and move on. And also a brief moment during which people said, well, maybe this justifies all of the Israel policy that the Biden administration has been engaging in, standing just a little too close to the Israeli government and bear hugging them through this whole thing. And maybe it would all have been worth it if it wasn't ever aimed at, well, I can impose restraint on the Israelis with regard to how they behave in Gaza. No, that didn't seem to be in the offing. But I can, by not isolating them and not pushing them away over Gaza, restrain them with respect to Iran, which might be more important, generally speaking, for the rest of the population of the Earth, because this could explode into World Wars 3 through 7, possibly. And that sounded pretty good until, I guess, a phone call late at night at the last minute from the Israeli government. Hey, we're going to actually bomb more Iranian targets. So now I don't know what the explanation is. And I wasn't sure that was the explanation then, and I guess I'm less sure of it now. But there you go. 3 Iranian officials confirmed that a strike had hit a military air base near the city of, I don't know the city, Isfahan, I'm guessing is the pronunciation of this. That's in central Iran on early Friday. It's always in central Iran, but that's when the missiles landed, early Friday. But did not say which country had mounted the attack. Was it Bahrain? Was it Oman? Was it Dominica? No. As it turns out, that's interesting that Iran doesn't immediately blame it on Israel. However, that's what it looks like. Flight tracking websites showed that civilian planes had diverted their routes away from this area during the time. That seems smart. The Israeli military declined to comment, at least to the reports of last night. All the officials spoke on condition of anonymity because they were not authorized to discuss it publicly. But many of them spoke with heavy Israeli accents, apparently. There's a couple of updates, several updates, as a matter of fact, if this is in chronological order. Where are we with the live updates? 16 minutes ago, the New York Times had this much to say about it. Iranian officials reported blasts overnight at a military base near the city of Isfahan. That's what we heard before. Israel had vowed retaliation for Iran's attack last weekend, but muted initial reaction in both countries suggested they wanted to ease tensions. But then what are we going to do with all these weapons? So I guess they launched them. That's where we stand. No, I don't know. Is there any saber rattling from the Iranians saying we're going to strike again? Maybe they're just going to do it without talking about it at this point. But yes, also creating problems for other countries in the region because no direct flight path from Israel to Iran that doesn't bother somebody else. Jordan, Iraq, Syria, having its own issues, can't really be bothered to defend its airspace. Nobody knows whether they can or not. Jordanians who helped shoot down some of the Iranian drones and said that they would do the same in retaliation not in retaliation, but if Israeli weapons overflew their airspace, but not this time. And I don't know. Don't know whether they knew or weren't capable or were just talking trash, hoping to dissuade the Israelis, and then not really wanting to get into a confrontation with them, allowed the overflight. I don't know. We won't clear that up. Not our bailiwick here, but as soon as there's some analysis that bears repeating, we can perhaps dive into it. All right, well, let's see. Let's jump back into Pocket. Here's a couple of things that I wanted to share with you, some things that I thought would be better saved for Friday, like this one, because it is the last day of authorized, warrantless surveillance that we really don't love very much, being allowed here in the United States under the current FISA bill. It expires today. And that's one of the things that Congress has to hang around to try to take care of, or else what? I don't know exactly, but I do know this. Charlie Savage thinks he knows, and I tend to believe him. He's pretty good at this stuff. Let's take a look at this thing I teased yesterday. What happens if a powerful surveillance law expires this week? The powerful surveillance law is FISA. No matter what you think of it, but okay. Senators are under pressure, the subheader tells us, to reject amendments to a House-passed bill. Procedure party, listening. Senators under pressure to reject amendments to a House-passed bill so that it can become law before a statute, FISA, expires on Friday night, or at least a section of FISA anyway. I'm not certain if I understand whether it's the whole damn thing or just some parts of it. It's probably just some parts of it. Anyway, that's supposed to happen Friday night. That would be midnight. That's the deadline. And the program would continue, though, after any such lapse, but with some caveats. So it does sound like it's only a partial expiration. And let's get a look at what parts they are. Okay, so you get the situation procedurally, right? The House has passed its renewal bill, and the Senate is under pressure. Don't mess with it. If you amend it, it has to go back to the House again, and we won't make it in time, and there'll be at least a partial expiration. So, Senate leaders of both parties, and they do have one on the Republican side still, they are urging their colleagues to renew an expiring warrantless surveillance law before it lapses at midnight on Friday, as advocates of the law have argued that any expiration would mean going blind on a key source of counterterrorism information and other foreign intelligence. And they threaten this regularly every time there is a reauthorization in the offing. And it's probably true, but there are usually members of Congress who are just as happy to see it expire because they either want the practice abolished entirely because they feel like it is too intrusive or too subject to abuse, or would at least like to rein in the powers or place some new procedures on top of it. So, what sorts of things would we be going blind to? I guess we'll find out. That deadline adds pressure to senators not to vote for any amendments to the version of the bill that the House passed last week, since any changes would force the legislation to go back to the House rather than swiftly arriving on President Biden's desk. But the suggestion that the tool itself would simply lapse on April 19th is significantly misleading. And don't forget, this being April 19th, the House is back down to what? Like a one vote margin. I forget the name of the guy already because he was so forgettable, who has scheduled his resignation for today, such that will happen and not trigger a special election in his home state. Anyway, a national security court this month granted a request from the government that allows the program to operate for another year, even if the law, known as Section 702, expires. So this is one provision of FISA. It's not the entire scheme, of course. Still, it is true that such an expiration could lead to smaller gaps in collecting some messages, here is a closer look. And I guess if there really is going to be a blind spot, in the middle of a drone war between Israel and Iran, if that is in fact what's erupting, that's not a great time to go blind. Is there really a good time? What is Section 02? Well, everyone knows what Section 702 is. We defined it yesterday. Limited slip differential that distributes power equally between the left and right rear tires. It is a law, in fact, that authorizes the government to collect, without a warrant, and from U.S. companies like AT&T and Google, messages of foreigners abroad who are targeted for intelligence or counterterrorism purposes, right? Foreigners outside of the United States. But there's always complications in intercepting communications. Did someone here see it? Were they American? Is it okay to gather up their information just because they are receiving these messages, et cetera, et cetera? The idea is that in the internet era, foreigners' communications are often handled by domestic companies. But it is controversial because the government also sweeps up messages of Americans to and from these foreign agents. And some of them work for Donald Trump, by the way. The law traces back to a warrantless wiretapping program that President George W. Bush, you remember him, secretly created after the terrorist attacks of September 11th, 2001. And everybody said, what is this secret legislation crap? You can't do that. And yet they did do that, and we were stuck with it, and then we were finding ourselves being threatened with terrorist attack if we didn't keep renewing it. It's really not a great pedigree. Anyway, that secret program violated the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act, or FISA, which requires warrants for national security wiretapping on domestic soil. And after the program came to light, well, Congress didn't like it very much, but of course nobody really liked it very much, but the New York Times buried it until after the 2004 election. Oh well. Hi everybody, it's me, David Waldman. Yes, the same guy who interrupts you all the time. Interrupting you one more time just to tell you again, another reminder that your contributions are what keep this show on the air, and patreon.com, patreon.com, is still among the easiest ways to make the sustaining subscription donations that keep us afloat. Are you ready for the pep talk about how our Patreon campaign is still going strong and growing? Well, too bad. Yeah, the plain fact is we actually are headed in the wrong direction, and whereas we once had about 175 monthly patrons, we're now actually down below 150. Time to recruit some more. Not exactly the kind of news I wanted to share, but there it is. For those of you in a position to support the show, patreon.com does make it easy to make those secure, recurring monthly contributions to do so. Patreon.com/KagroX gets you straight to our donation page. We've been through a lot together. The worst of the pandemic, we hope. The worst of the insurrection, we hope. So go ahead and treat yourself. You don't need an excuse. Give yourself the gift of a little something you enjoy in life. Support the show. And of course, if you happen to prefer using PayPal or even the Square Cash app, we're up and running on those options too. So thanks again, everyone, for all your support. We couldn't, or at least shouldn't, do it without you. Hope you'll be on board soon too. Thanks for all your support. All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. You know, as I look back over the break to try to find the installment that I got from Rosalind McGregor, guess what? I discovered that there are several. I'm way behind on this. I don't know what happened. It must have just come during a really tight period in the work schedule here. But the good news is the latest that she sent me is in fact an article that we can read. But I've missed out on a couple of Rosalind contributions here that we got to get caught up on. And usually I like to roll through them and tighten them up and preview everything and make it sound as good and professional as we can, just so that everybody else looks good compared to me. And I don't know. Let's see if we can't work them into the schedule and make sure that we get the benefit of her having shared these things with us, even though she did so almost a month ago. I can't believe it. I don't know how I missed these things. But I apologize. We'll get around to it. But first, I need to tell you about what's going to happen this Friday, today, if FISA Section 702 is not renewed. And I don't know. Like I said, I have mixed feelings about it. Certainly don't care very much for Rand Paul, although he is a constant critic of this program. You know, one of the stopped clock things, I guess, or blind squirrel, perhaps you might say. Ron Wyden, I trust a lot more than Rand Paul on this, but they both are severe critics of the way the program is being run. But you remember the provenance of the program. George W. Bush, in the wake of September 11th, said we need to have this ability. Let's just go do it. The New York Times knew about it and said we can't tell anybody about it because it could affect the outcome of the election, which was one of the most astounding things I've ever heard in my life, by the way. Of course it could affect the outcome of the election. Why don't you just stop reporting on the elections entirely if you don't want to affect the outcome of an election? But I don't know. I don't know how we normalized that and how we let that go, but we did. Anyhow, so after the program came to light, eventually, Congress in 2007 legalized a form of it in a short-lived law called the Protect America Act. What a great name. Lawmakers enacted Section 702 the next year, carving out a more enduring exception to FISA. Congress extended Section 702 in 2012 and 2018. It is now set to expire again. Time flies when you're spying on vast numbers of Americans. What are the proposals before the Senate? The House bill would tighten some controls on Section 702 while extending it for another 2 years. Remember, they had to knock that down in order to shake loose the Freedom Caucus objectors. And by the way, where did I find this thing? Somebody, I think Scott sent this to me yesterday late in the show, and then someone else has forwarded another thing. I'm just thinking about the Freedom Caucus and their various activities. Is this here? On this one or no? Okay, it might be in one of the emails or whatever, but apparently the Freedom Caucus has organized a, I'm just going to have to find the thing, because it's one of those, you just got to hear it correctly. If I try and guess, I'll ruin it. But here's Mighty OCD's notice to me about it. The House conservatives have a special group, Business Insider reports, that is dedicated to preserving their power, which is amazing because they're doing a terrible job. And, it's the Floor Action Response Team. I'm not kidding about this. And, if you're thinking it through, you see why I say that. The House Freedom Caucus has formed a Floor Action Response Team. In other words, if someone raises a point of order or tries to bring a bill to the floor that they don't want to come to the floor and they're looking to block, they need somebody on the floor to try and use their procedural knowledge to delay things or block it entirely, or any unanimous consent requests they need to be around to object to. But the floor action, that's where it happens. It's on the floor. It is action. They are responding and they work as a team, but everyone can pretty quickly see that they have named their organization Floor Action Response Team. FART. Yeah. That's unfortunate, isn't it? So the Freedom Caucus fart, I guess, is always on the lookout. And you can hear some of their activity, their first recorded activity here in the call between Donald Trump and Brad Raffensperger. You hear them just chiming in at the beginning.
We found a way in other states, please.
There it is.
Excuse me.
Yeah, excuse me. All right. Well, I don't know why they did it. I don't know whether they thought it was funny. I don't know if they looked at the acronym or not. I can't tell with these guys. They are so dumb. It is entirely possible that they did not realize it, but they may also be trolling us all as well. Maybe we'll read the Business Insider story about it and see if there's any mention of it. But first, what happens if FISA expires? And what are the proposals before the Senate right now, right? There's the 2-year extension, tightening of some controls on Section 702. The bill would also expand the program in several ways, which doesn't sound like a lot of tightening, including by allowing it to be used to scrutinize foreign drug cartels. So, All right, sure, why not? While Senator Chuck Schumer, Democrat of New York and the majority leader, has not yet announced the details, it appears likely that before voting on that bill, the Senate will consider several proposed amendments, sought by surveillance skeptics and reform-minded lawmakers. And of course, that would, were any of them adopted, it would send it back to the House for their action and then cause a brief shutdown. It's not guaranteed that any of them will pass, and many of the senators who might otherwise be inclined to vote for such amendments will find themselves instead persuaded to vote against them and simply say, why don't we pass them in a separate vehicle after this is reauthorized? I don't know. But it won't stop certain senators from demanding their consideration anyway. Among them will probably be a proposal to bar officials from searching the repository of messages collected under Section 702 for the content of communications by Americans, unless the government first obtains a warrant. I mean, that's sensible, right? They've collected the information. There's not much you can do about that. They've tried and failed to prevent it in the past. But at the very least, you should not be able to rifle through that information without a warrant and then just see what you come up with. No fishing expeditions. Privacy advocates have long sought such a change, while national security officials strongly oppose it, saying it would cripple the program. A similar amendment in the House failed in a 212 to 212 tie vote. That's how tight things are over there in the House. Another possible amendment would remove an enigmatically worded provision. Oh, no, not one of those. That the House added to the bill that expands the type of service providers that can be compelled to participate in the program. Technology is changing. You got to keep up, I guess, if you want this to happen at all, which you might not. The provision is aimed at certain data centers for cloud computing that the FISA court ruled in 2022 fell outside the current definition of what services the statute covers, according to people familiar with the matter. I could see that. Well, it was a big enough struggle to say, we need to be able to cover computer-based communications. It's no longer about telephone calls. Or if you make a phone call, or what if you make a voice over IP call, or what if you email, or now, we'll allow access to the transatlantic cables that carry these messages. All right. Well, what about cloud computing? No one ever covered the cloud, whatever the cloud was. They came up with that one in between renewals. Okay. Privacy advocates have warned that it is too broadly worded, this, current practice, allowing for potential for abuses. On Thursday, the Justice Department sent a letter to Congress committing to using the expanded definition exclusively to cover the type of service provider at issue, the cloud storage facilities, I guess, in the 2022 litigation, and pledging to report to Congress every 6 months about its use. Hooray. The letter also said the number of technology companies providing this service is extremely small. I don't know whether that's supposed to comfort anyone. The Senate also could vote on a proposal to bar the government from purchasing personal information about Americans from third-party data brokers that it would need a warrant to obtain directly from a company. That's a cool workaround if it's not happening to you. But if it is, you'll be upset about it. The House on Wednesday voted to approve a standalone bill containing that measure called the Fourth Amendment is Not for Sale Act. Does that spell anything? F-A-I-N. FISA. No, I guess not. Okay, well, you can always try. And that's another procedural idea, right? If you don't want to get in the way of the reauthorization of 702, but you have a reform that you think is absolutely necessary, and either can't get support for it or whatever, but you can always try a standalone bill. But floor time being at a premium, it's not that easy to get. Why would the program continue if the law has expired, though? Remember that got mentioned? Here's an explainer for that. Congress wrote into the 2008 law a provision ensuring that the government would not be abruptly cut off from using the Section 702 program. The program operates under certifications issued each year by the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Court, and the government directs communications companies to participate in it. Crucially, the provision, Section 404B, says that despite anything else in the statute, these orders or directives shall continue in effect until their expiration dates. And I guess they don't time the expiration dates along with 702. Because the FISA court issued a round of certifications this month that expire next April 4th, this provision appears to mean that the Section 702 program can lawfully keep operating until then, even if Congress allows the underlying statute to lapse in the meantime. So we'll see whether they really mean that, maybe. And maybe there are members of Congress who say, well, why would we pass such a provision if we didn't intend to lean on it? I'm not afraid of letting this deadline pass in order to get a vote on my amendment. Has this theory been legally tested? Yes. In April of 2008, the presiding judge of the FISA court at the time, Reggie B. Walton, ruled that a similar provision in Section 702's precursor law, the Protect America Act, meant that a directive to Yahoo, yes, still had legal force after the act itself had expired. And in fact, Yahoo itself almost expired during the interim, but they're still around, and that the court could still compel Yahoo, that must have been fun, to comply with it. It is clear, Judge Walton wrote, that even after the expiration date, the challenged directives remain in effect until their expiration. But, yeah, all right, that was not worded beautifully, but there it is. That August, a panel of 3 federal appeals court judges upheld Judge Walton's ruling. Those precedents suggest the FISA court would rule the same way about Section 702, unless, of course, they record Brett Kavanaugh, in which case you thought you knew what the law was, but now you don't. Does that mean there is no risk of a gap in collecting communications? It sounds like it, right? The answer is no, apparently. Okay, tell us why, Charlie. While the overall program would continue, if the statute's lapse prompts a particular provider to balk at cooperating, well, but then there could be at least a temporary pause in collecting from that entity, according to a senior Justice Department official. The matter would end up in court, as happened with Yahoo in 2008. Even if the government ultimately prevailed, there could be a gap in collection of communications from that company. It's not clear how swiftly the court would resolve such a case, but maybe that's not such a horrible thing. And it's not like the terrorists are going to say, oh, I understand that there's a certain entity that might decide not to comply. Let's switch all of our communications retroactively to that entity and hope that, there's no court intervention during the period in which we've switched our activities to that. It's unlikely, but theoretically, a base that needed to be covered. What kind of dispute does the Justice Department think it could win? Okay. The department believes it could win a dispute in which a program participant balks at continuing to fully cooperate after the statute lapses. If somebody thinks they read things differently, we're not going to collect this information unless 702 is explicitly reauthorized. The Justice Department thinks they could take them to court and win. Under some iterations of this scenario, a company might stop turning over all communications of targeted foreign users, or it might keep turning over those the government had ordered it to target before the lapse, but balk at adding any new ones. And I guess, normally you might say, well, the major communications companies probably don't really want to have unnecessary litigation, especially if the Justice Department thinks they'll win it and that they will lose it. But, I don't know, what about communications that are ostensibly hosted? I don't know if this 702 applies to them necessarily, but I don't know. What if you're tracking QAnon weirdos through 8chan or something like that? Does that mean that's the sort of place that might, as a trolling option, attempt to withhold the information? I don't know. I'm not certain if that's, being contemplated or not, or maybe just isn't covered this way. The senior Justice Department official said the agency was confident that the government would prevail before the FISA court in such a fight, citing the Yahoo precedent. The official, who spoke on condition of anonymity, but we tapped his phone so we could tell you who he is, to discuss a legally sensitive topic, also noted that the directives are explicitly written to anticipate that the government would provide new targets over time. What might the government not be allowed to do then? Can we please have that? The government might be prohibited from forcing a new service to start participating in the program. So now's the time to start your cloud computing operation if they don't reauthorize this thing by Friday. You can be the surveillance-free cloud option that everyone will run to and then all be arrested later on when things are reauthorized, or you just find out they had your information anyway. While major communications companies already participate, new internet-based communication services regularly emerge when agencies learn that a suspected adversary, if you're talking to the British, or adversary here in the United States, is using a service that is not part of the program. The government directs that service to join the program. It directs them. Why don't you join the program, pal? According to the Justice Department official, this happens multiple times a year. If the provider balks, the matter goes to the FISA court. But since the provision centers on allowing orders that were already in effect to continue until they themselves expire, it is not clear that the executive branch or the court would have the power to issue new orders to a new service. So yeah, some shading there and nuance, and I'm glad we've got it. Charlie Savage, I think, has done a pretty good job explaining it, and there you have it. Although, you have to read a backgrounder, perhaps, on exactly what is Section 702, why do we have it, what does it do, what does it not do, in order to keep up. All right, let's see. By the way, news out of Michigan, speaking of Rosalind McGregor, as we were earlier, I don't know why we didn't make a point of mentioning it the other day, but Michigan Democrats have recently won special elections that give them back full control of state government. I guess there was a point there during which things were thrown back into, probably into a tie in one or another of the houses of the Michigan legislature. But Joey Capoletti updated us on it on the 16th of this month that Democrats won back a majority of the Michigan House and restored their party's full control of state government on Tuesday, thanks to victories in 2 special elections. Now, this requires some pronunciation skills. In the 13th district, covering Warren and parts of Detroit, May, Zhang, it's Xiong, and I constantly am forgetting my Chinese pronunciation advice from all of you in this, but let's see. Mai Xiang, and Peter Herzberg, which is easier for me to pronounce, won in the 25th district, which contains the cities of Wayne and Westland. So it's like all W's. Warren, Wayne, Westland, the crucial W's, like in Wisconsin. Both candidates were favorites in the heavily Democratic districts. The lower chamber had been tied 54-54 between Democrats and Republicans since November, when 2 Democratic representatives vacated their seats after winning mayoral races in their hometowns. Democrats flipped both chambers in 2022 in the midterms while maintaining control of the governor's office to win that favorite of terms, the trifecta, for the first time in 40 years. And they moved quickly to roll back decades of Republican measures and implement the party's agenda in their first year, including overhauling the state's gun laws. So anyway, exciting developments in government there in Michigan. Since the House deadlocked, Republicans have pushed to pass legislation that they say is bipartisan, such as government transparency package, which would open up the legislature and the governor's office to public record requests. With each Democratic candidate winning on Tuesday, the party will regain control through the end of the year, with every seat in the House, again, of course, up for re-election in November. So, there you go. A little bit of background on the candidates, if you like, but I wanted to at least get on the record. That happened, and we should be happy about it. Okay, let's see. This bumped us back out of Pocket, so we got to make our way back. And, yeah, I don't like this new system for opening windows in Pockets. But okay. Also, I guess, really up for consideration, something we haven't read yet, but alluded to the other day, and we put it in the roundup. Should we read this now and then just continue with discussion of it over the top? Sure, why not? Because there's no other plan at the moment. But we made mention of it in passing yesterday. The New Republic, Alex Finley, writing for TNR, back on April 12th, asking the question in the headline, the question comes next. Russia is buying politicians in Europe. They're on sale. Is it happening here too? Question mark. Oh my God. Of course, Kevin McCarthy thinks it is, but he's not relevant anymore. But everyone knows that he thought that Russia, or Putin anyway, was paying Trump and Dana Rohrabacher. Rohrabacher quickly relegated to obscurity. Donald Trump, however, Republican nominee for president just now, and on trial for various things in like 18,000 different jurisdictions, as you know. None of them, though, being bribed by the Russians. That's not the charge that's facing him, though it underlies everything. A former CIA officer explains how a vast pro-Putin corruption network uncovered in Europe is a warning sign for the U.S. Not that anyone's going to pay attention to it. We will. But remember again, I've told you 1,000 times, right, the conversation in which Kevin McCarthy said, I think Putin pays Trump, was a conversation originally about the then Ukrainian prime minister coming to the United States to do what? Well, to warn that a vast pro-Putin corruption network uncovered in Europe is a warning sign for the U.S., just like Alex Finley's subheader tells us. Now going on 8 years later. Okay. The piece is illustrated with a really unfortunate high-resolution close-up of Marjorie Taylor Greene looking particularly grim, and it's very unpleasant. Just thought I would let you know that. So trigger warning for some of you when you look up this article. Democrats for years have warned about Russian influence in the Republican Party under Donald Trump, but now even some prominent GOP members of Congress are sounding the alarm. And, of course, that alarm was sounded 8 years ago by the top echelons of Republican leadership, including the then Speaker Paul Ryan. Steve Scalise was there. Kathy McMorris McRogers McBean was there. Kevin McCarthy was there. They all heard it. It was they were caught on tape saying, we have acknowledged this warning. However, this was during the transition to the new Republican pro-Russian stance with respect to Ukraine. While they were having this conversation, Donald Trump and Paul Manafort were changing the Republican Party platform to eliminate support for Ukraine and throw their support instead to Russia. How weird. Anyway, what's going on here? Another member of Congress is speaking. This is Michael McCaul, chairman of the House Foreign Affairs Committee and a Republican. I think Russian propaganda has made its way into the United States, unfortunately, and it's infected a good chunk of my party's base. Funny that he says base, because it's really, he means also my colleagues in this party, in this House. That's what he told Julia Ioffe, working for Puck these days. Representative Mike Turner, chairman of the House Intelligence Committee, went even further, telling CNN's Jake Tapper, that's how you go further, you talk to CNN, a few days later, we see directly coming from Russia attempts to mask communications that are anti-Ukraine and pro-Russia messages, some of which we even hear being uttered on the House floor. That's where they do their uttering these days, on the House floor. But yeah, essentially official discourse on the floor of the House of Representatives and making it into the congressional record and everything, and sometimes driving votes in Congress. Apparently, well, Russian propaganda, direct from Moscow, I guess. Which Republicans might they be referring to? One wonders. Representative Ken Buck didn't hesitate to point a finger at Representative Marjorie Taylor Greene, saying on Monday, and I guess is this Monday or last? April 12th. So I guess that was last Friday. So last Monday, Ken Buck had what to say? I have to go back and find it again. Okay. Ken Buck didn't hesitate in pointing a finger, saying, Moscow Marjorie. That's what he calls her. Ken Buck. Moscow Marjorie is focused now on this Ukraine issue and getting her talking points from the Kremlin and making sure that she is popular and she is getting a lot of coverage. I don't know how popular she is. I mean, in her district, I guess, yes, but elsewhere, not as much. They're saying aloud what they once whispered behind closed doors. And look at this. Back in 2016, when he was a Republican congressman but not yet House Speaker, Kevin McCarthy said in a private meeting with GOP leaders, there's two people I think Putin pays. One being Rohrabacher and the other Trump. Swear to God. Rohrabacher, once dubbed Putin's favorite congressman, lost his seat in 2018. McCarthy, confronted with the leaked audio in 2017, although he was confronted with it earlier than that, claimed it was a joke. But anyone paying attention to how Russian intelligence services run influence operations, which I do, not me, but the author of the article, I pay some attention to, I guess, which I do as a former CIA officer, though. Anyone who pays attention knows it is anything but a joke. That is, it raises a legitimate and deadly serious question. Have Russian operatives paid any Republican officials? Consider the news last week that authorities in several European countries had uncovered a vast corruption network. Consider that the Europeans had come to us in 2016 and said, we know about this network already. And 8 years later, we're saying now there's things being uncovered. But okay, what are they saying? They've uncovered a vast corruption network in which European politicians were paid to spread anti-Ukraine and pro-Russian propaganda. The network, according to intelligence sources cited by Czech media and confirmed by the country's prime minister, that's the second sitting prime minister to warn us about this, was orchestrated by pro-Russian Ukrainian oligarch Viktor Medvedchuk. I don't know how I am on the pronunciation of that one, but politicians from Germany, France, Poland, Belgium, and the Netherlands, and Hungary, I added an and in there, were allegedly paid directly with cash, euros, I guess, or through cryptocurrency exchanges, in which case they lost half their bribe within 15 minutes of getting bribed. But anyway, that's their problem, not ours. The case highlights an important misunderstanding that arose during Trump's first presidential campaign about how malign influence operations work. Let's take a look at how they work after this. All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Roots Radio. Let's pick it up with the New Republic article that we were just reading, reminding us, really, 8 years since we first heard about the Ukrainian Prime Minister warning us about this, that now we're being warned once again by sitting Western European governments that there is this massive influence operation going on in which the Russians are just simply paying elected officials directly to launch anti-Ukrainian and pro-Russian propaganda into the discourse. The case highlights this important misunderstanding we were going to hear about next that arose during Trump's first presidential campaign about how malign influence operations work. They are not simply or even primarily bot or troll networks on social media that amplify lies and propaganda, though there's certainly that going on, I'm sure. They're human intelligence operations, too, not unlike what you might see in a Hollywood film, which is what makes it so difficult to believe, I guess. Operatives of Russia's security services meet with politicians, journalists, activists, and other influencers and pay them to carry out certain tasks. The idea is to push narratives and policies that help Russia, but to mask them behind a local face. In the aforementioned case, the popular website Voice of Europe was allegedly used to push the propaganda and to facilitate the payments. This provides Russia plausible deniability, but it also makes it more likely that audiences will trust the messages. It serves a purpose within Russia, too, as domestic propaganda purportedly showing that people in other countries agree with the Kremlin's positions. The Voice of Europe scandal is merely the latest example of Russian influence on the continent. Last year, the Organized Crime and Corruption Reporting Project, we've read lots of their work, revealed that politicians in Germany, Italy, and Cyprus were paid by Russian operatives to introduce legislation literally written by Russian intelligence officers. The OCCRP also uncovered examples of parliamentary staff members, party activists, and members of think tanks publishing articles in European press outlets under their name, while the articles were actually written by Russian handlers. Not unlike some of the conservative training networks we have here in the United States, and who knows whether any of them have of late been influenced by Russian actors instead. Anyway, one activist from Austria even complained to his handler about the quality of one article that had been coordinated with the Kremlin. "I'm not a robot," he said. Nevertheless, he published the article under his name in a Swiss media outlet. I guess once you're into the program, there's just no way out. Well, this doesn't sound like me, and it's stupid, and I would never say such a thing. Yes, maybe. But one, do you want the money? And two, do you want to fall out a window? Okay, well, in that case, I'll publish. It is naive to think the same pattern does not exist in the United States, given the ample evidence of coordinated pro-Russian talking points from several Republican politicians. Just this week, which would have been just last week, I guess, Marjorie Taylor Greene, Murdery Trader Greene to you and me, spoke to Steve Bannon about the Ukraine's persecution of Christians, which is a Kremlin talking point aimed at boosting the pro-Moscow wing of Ukraine's Orthodox Church, but also meant to sound like enticing to a certain U.S. audience, I'm sure. The U.S. should be spending money on the border with Mexico, not on Ukraine aid. Ever heard that one? That's a Kremlin talking point as well. Russia invaded Ukraine to defend itself against expansion of NATO. How about that one? Is that one that you've heard? Well, that's a Kremlin talking point too. Call for a ceasefire and give Russia Crimea and eastern Ukraine. Well, that's obviously a Kremlin talking point as well. While we cannot say for sure if any Republican officials are on the Russian payroll in ways similar to their European counterparts, have they been so brazen as to do that? We don't know. But we can be sure that they've been approached. As the Director of National Intelligence wrote in 2021, Russian intelligence operatives and their proxies, quote, sought to use prominent U.S. persons and media conduits to launder their narratives to U.S. officials and audiences. These Russian proxies met with and provided materials to Trump administration-linked U.S. persons to advocate for formal investigations, hired a U.S. firm to petition U.S. officials, and attempted to make contact with several senior U.S. officials. They also made contact with established U.S. media figures. That was all quote. As for payments, we've seen a disturbing pattern. In 2017, Andrew Intrater donated $250,000 to Trump's inauguration fund. And that's one of the dirtiest pools of money ever, by the way. But still not much in the way of investigation there. And a few months later donated $35,000 to Trump's re-election campaign. Intrater is probably a traitor, but is also a cousin of Viktor Vekselberg, a Russian oligarch who was sanctioned by the U.S. in 2018 for his connections to Putin. We know that oligarchs play an integral role in funding Russian influence operations. One oligarch revealed to special counsel Robert Mueller that Putin held quarterly meetings with his oligarchs to discuss strategic spending. In 2018, a Texas-based firm donated money to House Speaker Mike Johnson. Okay, that sounds normal. But that firm is 88% owned, wink, wink, 88% owned by 3 Russians. And last week, we learned that Trump Media received loans from a Russian bank to help the company stay afloat before it went public, and at a time when no U.S. bank would lend to Trump. Any donations that might have been made through anonymous LLCs to PACs, perhaps with an attached quid pro quo, well, those are likely to remain opaque due to the Supreme Court's Citizens United decision. And we cannot say if the financial transactions we do know about are nefarious. But the pattern paints a disturbing picture, particularly given many House Republicans' rabid opposition to Ukraine aid and Trump's reported Ukraine peace plan, which would cede Crimea and parts of the eastern Ukraine to Russia. A similar plan was floated by Paul Manafort, in case it was sounding familiar to you, Trump's 2016 campaign chairman, and his partner, Konstantin Kilimnik, a Russian intelligence operative, during the 2016 election. And in fact, it became part of the, or at least the layoff Russia part, became part of the Republican platform. The only thing that they were interested in changing in the entire platform for some strange reason. Among these entities promoted by the Voice of Europe propaganda network was Hungary's Center for Fundamental Rights, which considers preserving national integrity, sovereignty, and Judeo-Christian, whatever that means, social traditions as its primary mission. CFR is funded by the government of Viktor Orban and has twice organized a conference in Budapest for the Conservative Political Action Committee, which helps shape policy on the American right, a political union with Hungary as well, in order to own the globalists. Imagine having your CPAC conference paid for and organized in Hungary and then going there and screaming about globalism. Oh well. Anyway, the Heritage Foundation, which has spearheaded Project 2025, of course, that authoritarian blueprint for a future Republican administration, and it's important to put it that way. If it doesn't work out with Trump this time, they're just holding on to it for the next Republican administration, and they will start all over again and do as much as Trump or worse. It's hard to imagine worse than Trump, but at the time it was hard to imagine worse than George W. Bush. So this is how it works. Anyway, so the Heritage Foundation has become increasingly cozy with Hungary and even hosted Orban privately last month because the Prime Minister of Hungary has so much to do with our heritage here in the United States. It is quite possible, perhaps even likely, that some of the people who were on the Russian payroll were at the Heritage event. Don't know for sure, I guess. Their role to influence and build support for pro-Russian policies. We now have overwhelming evidence of vast pro-Russian influence operations throughout Europe that seek to exploit politicians, media personalities, and others. And some of these efforts have been successful. Here in the United States, while a pattern has emerged, we don't know the full extent of the influence yet. Maybe we should look into it. But it would be foolish, not to mention dangerous, to think we are immune, especially as we have been getting warnings for so very long. Okay, well, now that's on the record. You know about it. That's a good thing. What else should I impart to you before we break for the weekend? There are a ton of other things floating around out there that we really need to catch up with, and here's one of them. Let's take a look at this piece from the Washington Post, something that has been kind of under the radar for us, but it's out there. We should get to it. Leonard Leo, as you know, the head of the Federalist Society, has been subpoenaed by a Senate panel probing gifts to Supreme Court justices. Wink, wink. Which ones? Well, you could probably guess. But when you say, when news broke about all of those things, particularly Clarence Thomas, but I guess gifts to others as well, they thought they would subpoena Leonard Leo and ask him about it. And guess what he's doing? He's rejecting those subpoenas and I guess willing to risk contempt of Congress. I don't know whether it's something he just feels like fighting about, or just wants to delay his testimony as long as possible, or he thinks the Supreme Court people that he's giving gifts to will save him, or what? Let's find out. Toby Raji wrote this piece back on April 11th, and we need to get it on the record, so why don't we go ahead and do that? The Senate Judiciary Committee sent a subpoena Thursday, whenever that was, 2 weeks ago, to conservative judicial activist Leonard Leo as part of a months-long inquiry into undisclosed gifts to Supreme Court justices, and he promptly rejected it, calling the move politically motivated. Now, this is something we've become used to from government officials, people in the executive branch saying the legislative branch can't tell me what to do, but a private citizen, that poses a different kind of difficulty. But a private citizen who's got a protection network, well, maybe it would work. I am not capitulating to his lawless support of Senator Sheldon Whitehouse and the left's dark money effort to silence and cancel political opposition, Leo said of Senator Dick Durbin, the committee's chairman, in a statement to the Washington Post. And another example, of course, of every Republican accusation being a confession. He's not going to submit to the dark money effort to silence political opposition that's happening in a coordinated fashion somehow on the Democratic side, says Leo. The committee voted along party lines on November 30th. Is that right? This is quite a while ago. All right. November 30th, to authorize subpoenas for Leo and Texas billionaire Harlan Crow following reports that Supreme Court Justices Clarence Thomas and Samuel A. Alito Jr., thank you very much, Washington Post, that they accepted and did not disclose free luxury travel and gifts from Harlan Crow, Leonard Leo, and conservative donor Robin Arkley II. I don't think we've called that name yet, so important addition to the rogues gallery here. Crow did not receive a subpoena on Thursday, his spokesman Michael Zona told the Post. I don't know whether he has since received one. In a statement to the Post, Durbin said sending a subpoena to Leo was a necessary step. Since July 2023, Leonard Leo has responded to the legitimate oversight requests of the Senate Judiciary Committee with a blanket refusal to cooperate, Durbin said. His outright defiance left the committee with no other choice but to move forward with compulsory process, and for that reason I have issued the subpoena to Mr. Leo. Mr. Leo has played a central role in the ethics crisis plaguing the Supreme Court, and unlike other recipients of information requests on this matter, he has done nothing but stonewall the committee. This subpoena is a direct result of Mr. Leo's own actions and choices, Durbin continued. The committee did not respond when asked for a comment on why only Leo received a subpoena, and, well, it sounds like Durbin explained it, but when asked why so much time elapsed between the vote and Leo's subpoena being sent, Durbin's office declined to expand on his original statement. So as much as we've been giving Republicans in the House a hard time for delaying the Mayorkas impeachment delivery for 2 months, here the Senate Judiciary Committee delayed between the end of November and mid-April with delivering a subpoena that had been authorized. David B. Rivkin Jr., an attorney for Leo, said in a letter addressed to Durbin and dated Thursday, so that's a little while back, that Leo will not comply with the committee's unlawful and politically motivated subpoena, if that's what it is. We'll see. With Leo's refusal, Democrats would be forced to hold a Senate vote if they wanted to seek enforcement of the subpoena in court, a nearly impossible task in a narrowly split chamber, with 60 votes needed to break a filibuster. The November vote to authorize subpoenas for Leo and Crow came 2 weeks after the Supreme Court announced that the justices would, for the first time, follow a broad code of conduct to promote integrity and impartiality. But will they? We don't know. The High Court's new ethics rules were praised by some as a positive first step, but legal ethics experts criticized them for not including a process for handling complaints that a justice has violated the standards, and as giving individual justices too much discretion over recusal decisions. But now they have absolute discretion, so I don't know. Nothing has really changed. They put a code of ethics out there, but there's nothing compulsory about them. And of course, Leonard Leo, knowing that he can rely on a filibuster of a vote to authorize contempt proceedings, doesn't really want to be caught up in contempt proceedings, but just for trolling purposes, I guess you say, I'm going to defy the subpoena and let them see if they can enforce it. If they manage to enforce it, well, different story. But in the meantime, why don't I just not testify and watch them flounder? At the November hearing, Democratic senators said the code did not go far enough and that it was necessary to use subpoenas and press for more information from Crow and Leo to inform proposed legislation. Without an enforcement mechanism, this code of conduct, while a step in the positive direction, is insufficient to restore the public's faith in the court, Durbin said in his prepared opening statement. Because of this, congressional action remains both appropriate and necessary. Oddly enough, it also remains, well, without an enforcement mechanism, insufficient to restore the public's faith in Congress or the court. So anyway, that's kind of an interesting paradox. The committee's investigation into the court's ethical crisis, and these subpoenas in particular, are key pieces of our legislative efforts to establish an effective code of conduct. It's interesting, the effectiveness of the code of conduct is underlaid by the subpoena power to get the information they need, but guess what? They don't have subpoena power unless they can break a filibuster, and since they currently cannot do that, their subpoenas will end up being ineffective, so whatever. It all loops back on itself, but, one step at a time, and Durbin doesn't really want to admit that he's got no subpoena power. Republicans on the committee have criticized the subpoena effort as a political attempt to discredit the high court's conservative majority, though they really did that to themselves. Republicans walked out of the November meeting in protest and later questioned the validity of the authorization vote, accusing their Democratic counterparts of violating procedural rules. Not that it'll matter, because none of them will vote to invoke cloture on the contempt citation. Democrats on the committee launched the probe into the justices' relationships with private benefactors after ProPublica revealed last April, a year ago, that Thomas, for many years, failed to disclose on his annual reports free luxury vacations and private jet travel that he received from Crow, his longtime friend, it is said here. Thomas also did not initially report Crow's purchase of 3 properties from Thomas and his relatives, or that Crow paid the boarding school tuition of Thomas's great-nephew, of whom Thomas has legal custody. ProPublica, of course, also revealed that Leo arranged for Alito to take a luxury fishing trip to Alaska in 2008 that included free lodging and private jet travel. The lodging, according to the ProPublica report, was provided by Arkley. That's how he comes into it. Thomas and Alito said they did not think they were required to report the trips in annual disclosure forms. After ethics rules were revised in March of 2023, making clear that judges and justices must report private jet travel, Thomas then disclosed 3 2022 trips on Crow's jet. He also, for the first time, listed the 2014 real estate sale to Crow, a transaction that most ethics experts said should have been reported long ago. In July, the Judiciary Committee advanced legislation that would require the High Court to adopt an ethics code and create a system for investigating alleged violations of that code, as well as requiring justices to publicly explain recusal decisions. The bill lacks the bipartisan support necessary to clear the full Senate and is unlikely to be brought up for consideration in the GOP-controlled House. So, seems like common sense stuff, but apparently Republicans think that they can bury it and move on. Well, that's all right. We can probably bury the Mayorkas impeachment and move on from there. Lots of things can get buried and then, moved on from? How do we even express that? Okay. There's a couple other things, very many of them. What will be appropriate to try to squeeze in at this point? How about, we're scrolling way back here. It's an awful lot of things that we've been holding on to and not discussing of late. But maybe this would be a good time to bring up the article that Rosalind McGregor had suggested that we read. This is a sort of a change of or a shift in focus here. But Friday is as good a day as any for these things. This from theconversation.com. I don't know if we're familiar, but a piece entitled "A Dramatic Schism Over Social Issues," and I do have dramatic music, of course, that goes along with. Does it work for a schism in a church? I guess so. Dramatic is dramatic, right? I don't know. Of course, there's also the possibility of the wrath of God, and all this is expressed in thunder and lightning. All right. Well, anyway, a dramatic schism over social issues? Question mark. It's all a big question. The United Methodist Church has been here before, but this time America's religious landscape is far different. Let's see what it is about this particular conundrum that makes or has Rosalind's attention and warrants your own. Christopher H. Evans, professor of the history of Christianity at Boston University, has contributed this piece to the conversation. Literally, that's the name of the publication. The United Methodist Church's General Conference will meet in Charlotte, North Carolina, from April 23rd, that's Monday, is that right? To May 4th of 2024. So good. The timing is perfect. We held on to this for a little while, but there's still time to get it in before the conference. What's happening? Originally scheduled for 2020 and delayed 3 times due to the COVID-19 pandemic. Are you better off now than you were 4 years ago? This meeting of the church's legislative body comes at a critical time for the United States' second largest Protestant denomination. I did not realize that. In 2022, conservative Methodists announced a break with the UMC, forming the Global Methodist Church. So the United Methodists versus the disunited Methodists who say they're global. How do you like that? These leaders believed that the UMC had become too liberal, drifting away from orthodoxy, which was, I thought, one of the best things about it, but I'm not a Methodist. The issue at the heart of the split, however, revolves around the UMC's longstanding battle over LGBTQ plus rights. This denominational split draws comparisons to the one in 1844, you know, the one in 1844, when Methodists divided over slavery. Ooh. As a scholar of American religious history and Methodist studies, I see parallels, but also great differences between the current schism and the one in 1844. Both schisms center on predominant social issues of their eras. The current schism, however, comes at a time when United Methodists, like other American churches, must navigate a changing religious landscape, one where church membership is declining, especially among younger Americans. Next section here, Methodist roots. The UMC traces its origins to the 18th century Anglican clergyman John Wesley, and I guess all the Wesleyan things we hear about here in the United States, in the college world. Anyway, John Wesley, who sought to reinvigorate Anglicans' sense of personal faith, emphasizing piety and social engagement. Sounds good. Wesley's followers spread Methodism throughout the British Isles and North America. As the movement grew, his followers separated from the Anglican Church to form several Methodist denominations. The first Methodist church in the U.S., the Methodist Episcopal Church, was founded in 1784. This church and smaller Methodist denominations grew rapidly. By 1850, approximately 1 in 3 Americans affiliated with the church was a Methodist. How do you like that? Today, there are 80 Methodist and Wesleyan denominations around the world. A lot of schisms, I guess, with the UMC being the largest. Now on to the 1844 rupture. Like other Protestant churches before the Civil War, Methodists were divided over slavery. Wesley viewed slavery as a great social evil that deprived enslaved people of God-given human rights. However, U.S. Methodists, including one of the founders of the Methodist Episcopal Church, Francis Asbury, worried that enforcing the church's prohibitions against slavery would alienate members in the South. I'm just curious about this Francis Asbury person and clicking through to see what there is about this guy. But, it's a link to a book about him. All right. Well, study for later, I guess. So, yeah, he was a little worried about alienating members in the South. For much of the early 19th century, Northern and Southern Methodists, followed Asbury's lead, seeking to prevent a formal schism. At the same time, Methodism fractured. African Americans in the Methodist Episcopal Church were barred from being ordained as ministers, and church members often worshipped in segregated congregations. This led to the formation of many independent African American Methodist churches, the largest being the African Methodist Episcopal Church, founded by Richard Allen in 1816. Well, that was interesting history. At the 1844 General Conference, the slavery issue boiled over into a major schism. Oh, we're a little behind on our music here. Delegates voted to remove from office a bishop, James Osgood Andrew, because he owned slaves. Andrew's removal angered Southern delegates who argued that the slavery was sanctioned in the Bible. In 1845, Southern Methodist leaders withdrew from the denomination, forming the Methodist Episcopal Church South. Southern Methodists, we know all about them. Familiar with them now. We'll be right back.
Hi, I'm Scott Anderson, the guy that writes the daily summary for this show, Kagro in the Morning. Thank you to everyone that supports this show. Many of you send donations through PayPal, Patreon, Square Cash, Radio Public, and so on. Some of you write your own essays and send them in, or read articles with your own commentary. We appreciate it. Now, some of you are listening to this and thinking, I'd like to help, but isn't there something I could do that wouldn't require money or effort? Why, yes, there is. You can just like us. On Daily Kos, they call it the recommend button. YouTube has a thumbs up. There are hearts and likes and love buttons. Tap our love button. Tap our love button every day. Share our shows and summaries on Facebook and Twitter, YouTube and iTunes, Stitcher and Amazon. Most of these places allow you to write a review, so a sentence or two would be great. Recommend us to social media, or tell your friends to listen to the show. You aren't just helping us, you're helping them find their new favorite thing to listen to. You could change the world. So thank you in advance from me and everybody else in the world.
All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. All right. Well, let's see what we crammed in before the break. But let's continue on with this interesting background on the history of the United Methodist Church and the Southern Methodists and their schisms before and what they face now. Just makes for good Friday fodder, I think. We wanted to, I guess where we left off, we were just about to jump to, I guess, the next major development, that in 1939 the Northern and Southern churches reunited. I didn't realize that you could reunite after one of these schisms, but apparently they did, together with another Protestant denomination with historical ties to Methodism, the Evangelical United Brethren. They combined to form the UMC in 1968. Then the next chapter in this development, debating homosexuality. Okay. In 1972, the General Conference adopted a formal statement asserting that homosexuality, everyone loves the terminology, was incompatible with Christian teaching. Subsequent conferences tightened these restrictions, notably in 1984, when the church barred what it called, quote, self-avowed practicing homosexuals, unquote, wow, from being ordained. 1984. Since the 1970s, groups on both sides of the issue have mobilized. An organization called the Reconciling Ministries Network has worked to bring together UMC congregations who support the full inclusion of LGBTQ plus people. Conservative groups, meanwhile, such as a caucus called the Good News Movement, have campaigned to enforce the existing LGBTQ plus prohibitions. That's not such good news, is it? In 1996, the General Conference added legislation prohibiting clergy from conducting same-sex weddings, though the number who did so increased significantly. In recent decades, when things have changed, many of the members of many U.S. churches, including the United Methodists, have shown thankfully, greater acceptance toward LGBTQ plus people. The 2016 election of Karen Oliveto as the first openly gay bishop of any gender in the UMC marked these shifting attitudes. Conservatives continue to oppose reforms, including a growing number of United Methodists from outside the U.S., an increasing portion of the church. For example, many African United Methodists come from nations with strict laws banning homosexuality. Of the 862 delegates attending the upcoming General Conference, 380 will be from outside the U.S. Nearly 300 of these delegates will come from Africa. They are now, as the next section says, at an impasse. Conflicts between conservatives and progressives came to a head in 2019 when bishops called a special conference in hopes of preventing a schism. Their council endorsed what was called the One Church Plan, seems like an important thing for churches, which would have allowed United Methodists in different countries more autonomy. Specifically, they would determine or could determine how to address questions on sexuality. However, delegates voted overwhelmingly for what was called the traditional plan. This kept the church's restrictions against LGBTQ plus people in place while calling for more punitive measures against pastors who conducted same-sex weddings. Punitive measures, really. Okay. The 2019 conference then passed a resolution giving local congregations the option to leave the UMC over matters of sexuality. Congregations were given until the end of 2023 to disaffiliate, although the ramifications were to be finalized at the 2020 General Conference, and that never happened. This session was repeatedly postponed, however, due to the COVID-19 pandemic, i.e. a sign from God, one might say. Doubting that U.S.-based leaders would uphold the prohibitions of the traditional plan, a group of conservatives formed the Global Methodist Church in March of 2022, triggering an exodus of several local churches. As of early 2024, more than 7,600 churches have disaffiliated, representing roughly a fourth of United Methodist congregations. Their uncertain future is discussed next. Ahead of the 2024 General Conference, conservatives have indicated their intention to lobby to extend the deadline for disaffiliation. Okay. Some progressive United Methodists, frustrated by the UMC's persistent refusal to expand LGBTQ plus rights, have considered forming a third Methodist denomination. Regardless of what happens in Charlotte, Methodist churches will face challenging futures. Unlike 1844, when many churches were growing rapidly, the current schism comes as American Protestantism is shrinking. This includes not only mainline Protestant denominations, but more conservative churches as well. In 1968, United Methodist membership in the U.S. was 10.3 million. At the end of 2018, down to 6.7 million. Another serious challenge is the rising percentage of Americans with no religious affiliation, commonly called religious nuns, N-O-N-E-S, which is a poor choice, really, of wording, don't you think? Considering how easy it is to confuse with religious N-U-N nuns, but do you really have to say that nuns, N-U-N nuns, are religious? That seems pretty obvious. So I guess if they throw in their religious nuns, then it's, you know which one it is. The ones who aren't religious. That's another dumb level of this thing. Anyway, the serious challenge being presented by the rising percentage of Americans with no religious affiliation, many of whom are disillusioned by anti-LGBTQ plus policies. Regardless of the General Conference's outcome, that's the big mystery, Methodists face a religious landscape unknown to their 19th century predecessors. There you have it. I don't know how many of you are involved in United Methodist churches or just have them nearby and wonder what your neighbors might be up to. Not usually within the charge of our show, but a major part of life in America that is changing, and it can impact, everything impacts elections. And important enough to Rosalind McGregor that she thought we ought to take note of it, and we are in agreement. Thank you, Rosalind, for sending that along. I don't know if I have any way of engineering this backlog to get things on the air here. Let me just I'll let you know. Well, I should just save it until it's all ready. You know what I mean? And then we can run through these things. But this one is, well, I don't know. Should we just try and grab this thing and will we be able to just play it on the air this way? I don't know. Let's move it to the desktop here. Ooh, sound effects. Because it has to do with a similar topic. So let's see. Can I just, I probably should have hit play on it and let it run at this point. Why don't we just do it that way? If I can even find this thing, I'm going to have to move everything around in order to do it. Should I have just played it out through, well, it won't come through, man. All right. Where can we find this thing and make it easier? I'm going to give myself like 5 more seconds to find it easier and plug it into soundboard. Let's see if I can make that happen. But it's sort of a religious topic, I guess we could say. Why won't this grab this thing anymore? All right, well, file moved or missed. Oh, I see. Okay, well, this is becoming kind of a pain in the butt. But let's try this again one more time. We'll see if we can't move it here into one more shot and moving it into soundboard here. Is this the one? Let's see. All right. So let's run this. This is an interesting, like I said, related topic. Church is right in the title. So let's run through this and at least get rid of some of the backlog here. I really apologize for letting these things pile up. Rosalind, let's roll it and make it church day for Rosalind.
Good morning, David. You recently shared with your listeners info about a secret male-only religious organization, the Society for American Civil Renewal.
Ah, yes.
Unfortunately, there are others, and I'd like to put a spotlight on a Catholic group called Church Militant.
Yikes.
Today's article comes from the Detroit Metro Times and journalist Lee DeVito. He writes, "It looks like Church Militant, the Ferndale-based conservative Catholic media company that the Southern Poverty Law Center designated as an anti-LGBTQ hate group, is no more, at least for now. The company's website has shut down in the aftermath of a number of scandals, including a defamation lawsuit brought on by New Hampshire priest Father George Dallaire and the recent resignation of founder Michael Voris. The company also has not posted on social media since late February, around the time that Church Militant and its parent company, St. Michael's Media, ended the lawsuit by retracting an article and paying Father Dallaire a $500,000 settlement. It is also reportedly selling the pair of office buildings it owns in Ferndale. Recently, St. Michael's Media sent an email to subscribers with the subject line, quote, final correspondence, quote, after 17 plus years of teaching the faith, it is with heavy hearts we must now announce the closure of our Church Militant website, the email read, which was obtained by the Catholic blog called Where Peter Is. The challenges posed by insurmountable scandals and hurdles have made it increasingly difficult for us to continue our mission, unquote. However, that might not be the end of the story. The blog also reported on a second email claiming to be from Church Militant, featuring a new logo and a Houston, Texas address. Quote, Church Militant will be bringing you new content well worth your continued support as we partner with others just as devoted to seeing the advance of authentic Christianity and the ongoing struggle against communism, both in politics and the culture. The second email reads, we will be rolling out the first of our new content to you this coming week and are in current discussions to add more voices, some new, some familiar, and content in the coming weeks, unquote. In a social media post, former Church Militant employee Joe Gallagher claims that Voris is behind the new Church Militant. Quote, Voris began texting and calling former staffers about joining him on a new venture, but wouldn't tell them who he is working with. Gallagher wrote, I have proof, but staff are afraid of what lawsuit-happy Voris might do to them. Out of respect for them, I won't post the text. Voris was asking if they'd relocate to Texas and would not say who he was working for/with, unquote. Voris reportedly resigned in November for breaching the company's morality clause. While the nature of the morality clause was never made public, Voris vaguely alluded to personal demons in a video statement regarding his resignation. Gallagher wrote on social media, quote, Michael Voris hurt a lot of people. He attacked individuals privately and publicly, but couldn't even come clean himself about his own gay scandal, which was, yes, very gay, unquote. Voris did not respond to a direct message on social media asking for a comment. An email and direct message to Church Militant also did not get a response. The defamation lawsuit is pretty in the weeds, especially for the lapsed Catholics in the Metro Times newsroom, but the gist of it is that the anonymously penned article accused Father Dallaire of being emotionally unstable and incompetent, among other unsubstantiated claims. The article was allegedly written by lawyer Mark Ballesteri, who had an undisclosed conflict of interest, though Ballesteri has denied that he wrote the article. Needless to say, this is all incredibly messy, and the Metro Times is glad to hear that the Church Militant is getting the hell out of Ferndale. Good riddance. That's the end of the article. I wanted to alert people about a special group of nutcases setting up in Texas after closing up shop in Michigan. Back to you, David.
Well, I suppose we'll take that as progress. Thanks, Rosalind. Take that as progress for Michigan, that they've left Michigan. You know, I guess the atmosphere is hostile enough for them there, or maybe it's just trying to escape scandal. But of course, interesting when you're involved in scandal that's too much for Michigan. I guess you can still open up shop in Texas. You can't go wrong with a new church in Texas, but Church Militant, I don't think I like the sound of that one. Okay, just wanted to bring you up to speed on that one, a related issue, I guess, and giving us the benefit of hearing two of Rosalind's selections here, and we got more we got to get back to happening in Ottawa County as well, and I hope it's not too late to update ourselves on that perhaps next week. Let's see. Moving on from there and trying to make some final selections that can compete for your time here in the last couple minutes of the show. Oops, okay, I guess I must have, yeah. Oh, the new Pocket. You're driving me crazy. It disappears every time I open up an article. And, all right, let's see. Now I have to check on a few things that I have parked from social media. And, oh, yes, okay, this was the one about the jurors in the Trump trial. So we have covered that. And, all right, why not take your time in bringing this stuff back to my screen? Okay, let's see. Here's something that I've had sitting around, which would make, I don't know, I thought this made interesting conversational subject as well here. Let's see if we can do this without destroying our place in Pocket. But this from E News, E&E News by Politico. Is that right? What is E&E News? I don't know what it means. Not only that, but why? What's by Politico supposed to mean? But anyway, climate news. In this piece titled "FEMA Stuns Florida with Pricey Hurricane Penalty" by Thomas Frank. This from earlier this month, April 3rd. But I don't know. I saw this one circulated on social media, and interesting. See what you make of it here. A stunning federal decision is leaving residents of a Florida county that was devastated by one of the nation's most destructive hurricanes without an insurance discount that has, or had previously, saved them hundreds of millions of dollars. You'll never guess how this happens. And by the way, Donald Trump would be only too happy to do this to a Democratic county, and they will no doubt be accusing the Biden administration of doing the same to probably largely Republican county in Florida. And yet, all the warning signs were there. And from a procedural standpoint, it's hard to feel bad about this. The decision, where were we here? The Federal Emergency Management Agency, of course, FEMA, revoked the discount that it gave to 125,000 property owners in Lee County who have FEMA flood insurance after warning those local officials, by the way, about unsafe rebuilding efforts in the wake of Hurricane Ian in 2022. As I recall from skimming this article, there's a pretty good explanation in all this, and I don't have to stop and give my own. The decision shocked officials. I would have gone to the explanation first, but the decision shocked officials in one of the nation's most flood-prone counties, which is why this policy is in existence. You'll see in just a minute. One of the most flood-prone counties in the country, and it serves as a warning to communities nationwide to follow FEMA's requirement that homes being rebuilt after the floods must be protected from future disasters. I think long story short on this in terms of the policy is if you're flood prone, for instance, and rebuilding, FEMA will give you a discount on flood insurance, which is absolutely necessary for people to be able to, build and live with any confidence in a flood prone area like that. Look, Florida gets hit by hurricanes all the time. If it does, this place will be flooded. Here's what we'll do. We'll encourage you to do the right thing here. If you're not going to move out of here, you got to build back better, essentially, right? You build back with more protections for your home against the disaster of flooding. It's going to cost more money because the building requirements are more stringent. But basically they're saying here, Lee County ought not to, say, for instance, be issuing construction permits to people who are not going to comply with the higher standards and save themselves some money and headache later on by investing in the rebuilding stage in flood proofing to the extent that that is even possible. But in order to sweeten the deal, yes, you're going to have to add some expense to the construction of the new or reconstruction of the homes, but we'll give you a big discount. We'll get you some flood insurance that you're not going to be able to get on the open market and at a cut rate too. So we will help you get that money back by saving you lots of money on flood insurance. See how it works? Okay. Now, the agency's unusual move, canceling all of that, comes as growing flood damage due to climate change and ongoing real estate development in storm-prone areas has put a spotlight on communities that redevelop flooded areas without adding new protection, such as, for instance, elevating homes. Under President Joe Biden, FEMA has prioritized protecting the nation from weather-related disasters by pouring billions of dollars into projects to reduce damage from flooding, storms, and wildfire. But apparently down in Lee County, they don't want to reduce damage. So we won't reduce their flood insurance bills. Seems like a fair trade to me. I don't know. Lee County officials assailed FEMA at a Board of County Commissioners meeting on Tuesday. This was a while back, of course, and vowed to challenge the decision. And by the way, while I was reading along with Rosalind McGregor's article, I see one of her very wise tricks for dealing with some of these backdated articles. Instead of telling you that it happened Monday and just reading it verbatim, she says recently. Very good. Good thinking. Why I have never adopted such a practice, I do not know, but let's begin going forward. So where were we? Lee County had a Board of Commissioners meeting and vowed to challenge the decision. And wait till you hear about this. Anyway, it's almost like revenge politics, Commissioner Cecil Pendergrass said. Our citizens and taxpayers are being held hostage here and having to pay more. How do you like that? They view it as revenge politics because, of course, every Republican accusation is a confession. They want nothing more but to practice revenge politics. It is the platform on which Donald Trump is running for president. I will be your revenge. But it's not like revenge politics. It's actually like regular deal making. FEMA said, if you build back to these standards, we will give you a deal on flood insurance. And Lee County residents said, we will not build back according to those standards. but we would still like to have those insurance discounts. And FEMA simply says, well, that's not the way life works. And they say, this is revenge politics. Our citizens are being held hostage. Hostage? Build any way you want, but you're going to have to pay higher flood insurance premiums if you do. That's not up to us. That's the market is providing you with flood insurance. You don't like it, you can come to us, but only if you build this way. That's what we'll insure, and this is what they will insure. And it will cost you an arm and a leg to get your insurance from them. But if that's the way you want it, go do it. But they view it as revenge and hostage taking. They said FEMA's decision blindsided them. Oh, well, that could be an issue, right? At no time were we notified that we were in jeopardy of being retrograded. I guess that's what they call it when they remove your benefits. It was, if you failed to comply with an information request, you could face a retrograde. Lee County Attorney Richard Wesch said, well, the information they were requesting is, are you rebuilding according to our specific standards? And if you don't answer or say no, well, then you get retrograded. What do you mean you had no notice? That's the policy. FEMA has requested nearly 600 building permits from the county in a December 6th, 2023 letter that the agency gave to E&E News, who's reporting this. The letter says, failure to provide this information will lead to enforcement action, including a loss of insurance discounts. Well, we didn't, what did they say? At no time were we notified that we were in jeopardy. Well, you were notified at a specific time, December 6th, 2023. Either show us the building permits that show that you're building back to our standards, or we'll cut you off for not showing us the building permits. And the reason we assume you're not showing us the building permits is you were going to lose your insurance benefits if you showed us how you were actually building this place. But then you declined to show us, and then we took the only conclusion we possibly could take from that. We are committed to helping these communities take appropriate remediation actions and work towards future policy discounts, FEMA spokesperson Leah Krager said in a statement recently. The discount in Lee County had reduced the cost of each FEMA flood insurance policy by about $370 annually on average, according to an E&E News analysis of agency data. Plow that $370 annually back into the new construction standards, and it probably comes out, well, I don't know if it comes out a wash, and that's not a good really terminology to use in a flooding situation, but I'm sure it helps. FEMA sells most of the nation's flood coverage through its National Flood Insurance Program. And everybody hates socialism, of course, so maybe we should eliminate that from the beginning. But it's one of the pieces of socialism they love most in the anti-socialist corners that use it. And it provides community-wide discounts for areas that take extra steps to reduce flood damage. Of course, you take some extra steps to reduce the damage we'll have to pay for, we will lower your premiums. It's actually like not all that socialistic at all, except for the fact that they are the one provider of it. A small number of communities receive the discounts provided through FEMA's community rating system. Community rating, just like healthcare. In unincorporated Lee County and in 4 of its municipalities, property owners received discounts of 20% to 25%, some of the largest in the nation. This year alone, the discounts are cutting $35 million to $40 million off of flood insurance premiums in Lee County, according to the E&E News analysis. The discounts have been in place since 2007 and will be removed at the end of the fiscal year on September 30th. County officials were also outraged that FEMA officials said the decision was not subject to appeal. The agency told the county about its decision on Friday. Well, it's not subject to appeal, but what do they mean? Well, we'll get to that in a minute, but we'll listen to the reaction. Last time I checked, we do not live in a dictatorship. Have you checked Florida lately? We do not live in a dictatorship, Wesch said. The comment that this decision is final, there's no appeal, that's not our system of government. You're right, it's not our system of government. Now, our system of government has appeals through the judicial branch. And guess what? What they were saying to you is there's no appeal internally within FEMA. This is FEMA's final decision. Do you want to appeal it in the courts? You can do that. They're not saying you can't do that. They're saying there's nobody at FEMA you can appeal to change their mind about this thing. But let's demagogue about dictatorship. From Florida, Hurricane Ian, of course, made landfall in Lee County in southwestern Florida, where it obliterated tens of billions of dollars of property before sweeping across the state to become the third costliest natural disaster in U.S. history. Lee County, with 835,000 residents, is still rebuilding homes with grants from FEMA, socialisms, and other federal agencies, and with payments from the federal flood insurance program. Hello, we're paying for you to do this. The insurance program has long required that if an insured property sustains substantial damage, it must be elevated above local flood levels during repair or reconstruction. The requirement applies to properties that sustain damage equal to at least 50% of the property's value. It's pretty straightforward. The substantial damage requirement has been a financial burden that property owners and communities have sought to avoid by skipping damage assessments entirely or ensuring that the damage estimate was under the 50% threshold. FEMA first warned Lee County, remember, we got no warning. Well, they first warned him about the elevation requirement in a letter of February 15th, 2023 that said failure to enforce these regulations may result in sanctions against the community, including retrograde of community rating system discounts. I mean, it's all there in black and white. It's all there, black and white. Where is that? Is in this one?
Wrong, sir.
Right.
Wrong.
I mean, wrong.
It's all there, black and white, clear as crystal. You get nothing. You lose. Good day, sir.
Wow, and that fits in, and we get to put it in over our music. There's a little bit more to this one, but you get the gist of things. I don't know. I felt like a good process story to close things out with. Now, of course, time to turn things over to Justice Putnam for the West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, and he's got a doozy as usual. They're all doozies. How do you like that? Set for you coming up next. Let's see. Well, we'll tease you with a couple of items right after this.
From networksradio.com, you have been listening to Kagro in the Morning with David Waldman.
Here's a good one. I wish I had gotten to this one. A top leader of Charlie Kirk's national conservative group Turning Point Action has resigned after being accused of, you'll never believe it, forging voter signatures on official paperwork so that he could run for re-election in the Arizona House. Once again, every Republican accusation turning out to be a confession. Can't believe it. See you next week.